Do you ever freeze up when native speakers talk fast, even after months of study? I went from missing every other word to understanding native Spanish speakers with just a few powerful changes. So in this video, I'm going to show you the key reasons why you still struggle, how to fix them easily, and a game-changing new method to make fluent listening easier. Let's start by covering why a lot of people are wrong about listening. Firstly, listening is the most important skill in language learning. It is the foundation that everything else is built on. You build up the sound system, you pick up vocabulary without studying, and more than that, you learn about another culture from the perspective of native speakers. It just ticks so many boxes. And whilst vocabulary is important, you actually don't necessarily need a huge active vocabulary first of all. If you can understand people, you can reply without needing to reel off some massive monologue. But if you can't understand the other person, the conversation's over. That said, there is a common misconception that listening is a passive activity. It's not. If it were, you wouldn't have to do anything to understand native speakers. But that's obviously not true. And the explanation is at the heart of why so many people struggle when it comes to improving their listening skills. So what's going on? Well, there are actually two things happening when we listen. The first is sort of top down. By that, I mean having a general understanding of what someone's saying without necessarily picking up all the nuts and bolts. It's also going to include your existing knowledge about what the speaker is talking about. So for example, the first time I listened to the audiobook for Lord of the Rings in Spanish, knowing the plot already made it so much easier to understand. I knew what to expect and I could visualize the scenes from the movies. I didn't catch every word, but I could still follow along. Even just having background knowledge about a topic in English will help you when it comes to listening to something in your target language. There is a bigger problem that comes before that stage though, and that is the barrier that stops so many people from learning a language. Have you ever had it when you hear someone talking your target language and it just sounds like noise? You couldn't even ask what a particular word meant because it was just a wall of sound where you couldn't really say where one word finishes and the next begins. That's because rather than just this top-down processing of what you're hearing, your brain also has to process it from the bottom up. So let me show you what that means and then what you can do about it, because understanding it is a core part of improving your listening skills. So the researcher John Field said that listening problems often aren't failures of comprehension, but failures of decoding. So decoding, or decoding, means deciphering the noises of native speakers into the different sounds, syllables, and then words that make up the language. So you might be hearing words you already know, you just can't pick them out. Your brain has to do that work first before it can work out what's going on. And then way before it starts worrying about word order and grammar. So until your brain can process that wall of sound into the different words, you'll always struggle to understand native speakers. And importantly, you need to be able to do that in real time. As someone is talking to you, your brain is trying to decode everything. So if it can't keep up with processing that information, it's going to get lost. And that's when you're left there just nodding at someone, unsure if they asked you a question. So what's the answer? Well, we'll cover different tactics to improve your listening throughout this video, but so many people just overlook getting a lot of easy listening because it doesn't feel like you're trying to learn the language. But it will absolutely improve your skills at decoding the different sounds and stop you feeling lost, even just listening to lots of stuff that's made for learners. YouTube is full of tons of creators speaking slowly at a variety of levels. Although it might not always seem like the most exciting content to watch or listen to, it gives your brain the sounds of the language at a slower pace, so it has a better chance of processing them. As you get used to hearing those sounds, you can work your way up slowly and build to more difficult material. The more experience you get, the more you can improve the speed at which you process the language. So this easier stuff becomes the stepping stone to more engaging content. And on top of that, there's evidence that repeated listening to content improves your ability to hear the words you missed first of all, as you become familiar with the speaker and what they're saying. And there's something that is key to remember with all of this. This isn't like getting through a vocabulary list or a certain number of flashcards where you can see a number go up, which you might equate to progress. This is less tangible. So you won't necessarily feel the change day to day, but you absolutely have to listen to a lot of content in order to develop the skill. It doesn't have to be hard though, and in fact, trying to use material that is too difficult will mean that your brain won't be able to make sense of it. But knowing that you're building this foundation and that it's about putting the time in, that can help you stay consistent. With experience, your brain will get better at understanding the different voices, different accents, different quality of recordings, whatever. That is a good start. But there is another factor which holds people back from really making progress. So let's look at that next. So when I chat with language learners who are struggling, there is one key trap that so many people fall into, and it massively affects their listening skills. Essentially, they're trying to translate every word they hear into their native language. It sounds like a good idea, using one language to make sense of a new one, but the issue is that it's giving the brain more work to do, because on top of processing all these sounds into the different words of their target language, they're now adding translation as well. And quite quickly, they fall behind and then struggle to follow the conversation, and then they're left on a treadmill just trying to catch up with all the words that they missed. Now, I am not against translation. It's clearly a useful tool that you can use to help pick you up the language much quicker. The problem comes when we're actively trying to add it as an extra step when we're listening. Your brain has got limited bandwidth, and so the harder it's working to decipher what's going on, the more likely it is to feel overwhelmed. And so to improve your listening, there are a few things that you can do. One is to accept that it's okay to follow the gist of something, instead of feeling like you need to be a perfectionist and understand every single detail right away. You can come back and listen again, and you'll notice your comprehension improve each time. There's a sci-fi series on YouTube that I barely understood the first time I listened to it, but it was so epic that I came back again and again, and I picked up a bit more each time. And I got to enjoy it multiple times. And the more I understood, the more I enjoyed it. Eventually, I ended up talking about it in a lesson with my tutor, and I was able to use the words that I picked up naturally because I just listened to it so many times. If you're really struggling, you might have to accept that the content is too difficult at the moment. Just make it your goal to come back to it later, and you'll see how much you've progressed. Or another great option is to get a transcript and do some more intensive listening where you can pause and translate words that you don't understand so that you can still follow along. When you go back and just re-listen, then you'll realize that you're not translating in your head as much because you now understand what's going on. So your brain can just focus on piecing together the sounds. And these days, we've got some new tools at our disposal, so you don't have to struggle quite so much. And so let's look at one of those next. Okay, so it is accepted by the vast majority of researchers that to get good at a language, you need to get tons of exposure. Not just in terms of vocabulary, but you have to get accustomed to the sounds of how normal people speak. That's why language classes fail so many people. Yes, we can talk about testing and focusing too much on grammar, but ultimately, if you're not hearing enough of the language, you're going to really struggle. Simply focusing on listening will help you pick up those high frequency words which account for the vast majority of everyday speech. Now, that doesn't mean moving abroad, but creating an environment where you're surrounded by the language at a level that's not too difficult will make a massive difference. And with new AI tools, we can create listening material about things that genuinely interest us. Now, whilst I've spoken about AI in other videos, most of us learn a language because of people and culture. I want to hear from native speakers about their lives and experiences. I would much rather watch content from humans. And if you're traveling, yes, you could ask ChatGPT for restaurant recommendations, but it is much more interesting to be able to ask a local where they would go and eat. That being said, that doesn't happen overnight. And so we can use AI tools to help us out and get us there faster. So if you're looking for a way to create listening material about things that you're interested in and at the right level, more importantly, then I'd recommend Notebook LM. It has a load of other features, but for language learners, the best thing is that we can upload some text, be it a transcript, a link to a YouTube video or a news article, whatever it is, and If you can't find something, you can even get ChatGPT to make something specific for your level and interest, which you can then put into Notebook LM. It will then turn that into what is basically a podcast. Just by clicking on Audio Overview, it will create a podcast on whatever you've just given it. Bear in mind that if you give it something which is already too difficult for you, the AI will make content at a similar level. So to get Notebook LM to adjust the difficulty, you can give it prompts by clicking on the dots and then customize. That way you can be more specific and change the content to be easier if you need it. So you could write something like, I'm a lower intermediate learner of German. Use simple vocabulary and less complex sentences. It doesn't automatically make your transcript, but if you want one, you can then put it into any of the hundreds of speech-to-text transcription services online like Descript, don't know, Otter, honestly, there's loads of them. And whilst I don't listen and read at the same time a huge amount, there is evidence that reading and listening at the same time can help with comprehension. You see on the page how those sounds make up the words, and when I have done it, I can really see the benefit. Of course, you don't want to rely on having to read the transcriptions forever, as that could then start to limit your listening skills as you're effectively reading. But certainly for a good chunk of time, you might find it really helps. Oh, and if you put a YouTube video into Notebook LM, it will also create a transcript that I found to be really accurate, even when there's some really bad audio. So that is a useful tool, but there is a system that you can use to get the most out of your listening. So let's break that down next. Improving your listening isn't just about knowing more words. Professor Christine Go is an expert on studying listening in language learning, and she discovered something surprising. The most frequently reported problem was that learners failed to recognize words that they already knew. So difficulties in perception, rather than knowledge, often account for why people can't understand. To tackle this, there are some simple research-backed steps that have been shown to improve comprehension. The main point here is that listening is a trainable skill. It's not something that you're either good at or bad at. And importantly, you can improve it over time. So the first step is that before you start to listen to something, try and predict what you're going to hear. So if it's a podcast, from the title, you might be able to guess the sorts of topics and vocabulary that might come up. By having an idea for what might be coming up, you reduce that cognitive load from that top-down processing I mentioned. It will free up more of your attention for when you're listening. And then, as you're listening, think, am I getting the gist of this? You don't need to notice all the subtleties of the language. You just need to keep following along. And remember, this is training. It is not a test. You're just building your skills. After that first listen, ask yourself what you understood and which bits did you miss. And then with that in mind, you can go back and listen again. Because you've already heard it and reflected on where you need to focus, you have more capacity for noticing those smaller details. And then afterwards, again, focus on what you did well and then where you need to focus on and build your skills for the future. So if you still struggled to make out some of the words, slow down the recording. If you lost track of what they were saying because you felt a little bit overwhelmed, break the content down into some smaller chunks. Combine this process with repeated listening and transcripts, and you'll notice that your ability to hear the language will improve, which will open up more content and take you to another step closer to fluency. The next big problem is improving your speaking skills. So check out this video next to learn a simple system that will do just that.